You ever wonder about our past? Like way, way back. How do we get here? From what? And when? Most of us have this picture in our heads. It's that old drawing. An ape-like creature slowly straightens up. Then it becomes more human-like. Then it's a modern person. It looks like a straight line, a march from primitive to us. That's what many of us learned, or at least that's the general vibe we picked up. But then you hear things, new discoveries, ancient bones, DNA findings, and you start to think, is that simple picture, that straight line actually right? Or is it all a lot messier? The question is big. Is our whole timeline of human evolution completely wrong? That's a heavy thought. It's probably not completely wrong. That's too strong a word. But it's definitely not as simple as that line drawing makes it seem, not by a long shot. The story of human evolution is complex. It's a twisty, turny, branchy thing. It's full of surprises, full of dead ends we thought were main roads, full of unexpected detours. And it's changing all the time. That's the nature of science. We learn more. We dig up new evidence, we get better tools to understand what we find, and then our story, our timeline shifts. It gets more detailed, it gets more complicated. Sometimes it feels like it gets totally flipped on its head. Think about what we once thought. We had these ideas. A certain species lived at a certain time. Then it evolved into another species, and that one into the next, like chapters in a book. One after the other. It felt neat, it felt orderly, we thought we had a pretty good handle on the main characters. We knew the approximate order of events. We knew the general direction of travel. We knew about Lucy, we knew about Homo erectus, we knew about Neanderthals, and then us, Homo sapiens. It was a nice, clear progression. But reality, it seems, is rarely nice and clear. It's often much more confusing, and when it comes to our ancient relatives, that confusion is a big part of the fun. Every few years, something new pops up, something that doesn't quite fit the old story. A bone, a tooth, a whole skeleton, and suddenly, the neat timeline gets a bit wobbly. The straight line turns into a tangled bush, or maybe even a whole forest of bushes. One of the biggest reasons our timeline keeps changing is simply because we keep finding new stuff. Paleontologists, these amazing people, they spend their lives digging in dusty, hot places. In caves, in riverbeds, they're looking for clues, and they find them. Sometimes it's just a fragment, a piece of jawbone, but even a small piece can tell a huge story. It can shift our understanding of when certain traits appeared, or when certain groups lived. Take Homo naledi, for example. This was a huge find. A cave system in South Africa. Hundreds of bones. It was an entire population, or at least many individuals. And these creatures had a mix of traits. Some looked very primitive, small brains, curved fingers, good for climbing, but their feet and hands looked quite modern. And here's the kicker. They seemed to intentionally bury their dead. This is something we thought only much later larger-brained humans did. The real shocker? Their age. They lived surprisingly recently, at a time when we thought only modern humans were around in that region. Or maybe some late surviving Homo erectus. Homo naledi really muddied the waters. Where do they fit in the timeline? Are they an early branch that survived a long time? Or a later one that evolved some primitive features? It just doesn't slot neatly into the old, simple story. Then there are the Denisovans. These guys, we barely know them from fossils. A finger bone, a few teeth, a jawbone. That's it. But we know them from their DNA. And their DNA tells us they were a distinct group, different from Neanderthals, different from us. But they lived alongside us, and they interbred with us. Their DNA is still in some modern human populations, especially in Asia and Oceania. Now, if we only had the bones, we might have just called them a strange Neanderthal or early human. But the genetics told us a completely new story. It opened up a whole new branch on the family tree that we didn't even know existed. And it showed us that our past wasn't just groups replacing each other, it was groups meeting and mixing. And what about Homo floresiensis, the hobbits from the island of Flores in Indonesia? Tiny people, small brains. But they made tools, they hunted, and they lived until relatively recently, maybe 50,000 years ago. Long after modern humans were around, they might have evolved from an earlier form of Homo erectus that got stranded on the island. Over many generations, they shrunk, a process called insular dwarfism. Like elephants can shrink on islands. But their existence completely blew up the idea that bigger brains and bigger bodies were always the evolutionary goal. They showed that different paths were possible, and that different human-like species lived at the same time, often in surprising places. So, These new finds, they don't necessarily make the whole timeline wrong, but they definitely make it more complicated. They add characters we didn't know about, they show overlaps we didn't expect. They force us to redraw the maps, to rethink who was where and when, and who was doing what. It's not just new bones, though. It's also about new ways to look at old bones, or new ways to date them. Sometimes a fossil found decades ago and placed firmly in one spot on the timeline gets re-examined. New dating techniques, like more precise radiometric dating, can suddenly push an ancient find much further back in time, or make it much more recent. And that changes everything. If a species we thought was an ancestor turns out to be younger than its supposed descendant, well, that messes up the lineage quite a bit, doesn't it? It means we have to rethink who begat whom. Or maybe that they didn't beget each other at all. Maybe they were just cousins, or distant relatives on separate branches. Also, the way we define species in the fossil record is tough. With living animals, it's often about whether they can breed and produce fertile offspring. But with bones, you can't exactly test that. So, paleontologists look at features. Skull shape, tooth size, bone structure, and sometimes what was once considered one species gets split into two. Or what was thought to be two different species gets lumped into one. This constant re-evaluation means the names and relationships on our timeline are always in flux. It's not set in stone. It's written in pencil, ready for edits. But the biggest game changer by far has been genetics. Ancient DNA. This is truly revolutionary. For a long time, we could only guess at relationships based on fossil evidence. How similar did the bones look? How old were they? But now, if we can extract DNA from ancient remains, we can get a much clearer picture of who was related to whom, and how closely. The story of Neanderthals is a prime example. For years, they were seen as brutish, dim-witted cousins. A dead end. They went extinct. We, the clever Homo sapiens, survived and thrived. The timeline was simple. Neanderthals existed, then Homo sapiens came along, and Neanderthals vanished. We replaced them. But then ancient Neanderthal DNA was sequenced, and the shocker came out. Many modern humans, especially those of European and Asian descent, have a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA in their own genomes. What did that mean? It meant that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens didn't just meet. They didn't just compete. They interbred. They had children together. This completely changed our understanding. It wasn't a clean replacement. It was a more complicated interaction. A blending. A partial absorption. This discovery blew apart the idea of a simple, linear progression. It showed that our journey was far more intertwined with other human groups than we ever thought. And then the Denisovan DNA came along, as I mentioned, and we found that people in certain parts of the world also carry Denisovan DNA. So, in some parts of the world, modern humans have DNA from both Neanderthals and Denisovans. Think about that for a second. Our ancestors, at different times in different places, were mixing it up with these other groups of humans. It's like our family tree isn't just a tree, it's a whole thicket, with branches growing into each other. Fusing, separating, coming back together. This genetic evidence paints a picture of multiple groups of ancient humans, all alive at the same time, all moving around, all interacting, sometimes peacefully, sometimes not. Sometimes breeding, sometimes not. It's a much more dynamic and complex world than the simple timeline suggested. It means that the Out of Africa story, while still fundamentally true that Homo sapiens originated in Africa, isn't just one single clean migration wave. It was likely multiple waves, and those waves met other human groups who had migrated earlier, or who had evolved in different parts of the world. So when people ask if our timeline is completely wrong, it's about this. It's about the shift from a ladder-like progression to a bushy, tangled tree. The old view was like a ladder. Each rung was a different species, leading directly to the next. Australopithecus to Homo habilis to Homo erectus to Neanderthal to us. Simple. Understandable. The new view, supported by all this evidence, is like a sprawling bush. Or many bushes growing together. At any given time in the past few million years, there were often multiple species of human-like creatures walking the earth. They weren't just stepping stones one after another, they were branches, some growing parallel, some intertwining, some ending abruptly. Some evolving in isolation, some interacting. Imagine being in Africa 2 million years ago. You wouldn't just see one type of early human, you might see several, maybe Homo habilis. maybe Homo erectus, maybe some late surviving Australopithecines, all at the same time, all sharing the same landscapes. That's very different from the linear progression idea. And it's not just in Africa. Later, when Homo sapiens left Africa, they met Neanderthals in Europe and Asia. They met Denisovans in Asia. Maybe they met Homo floresiensis in Southeast Asia. We were never alone as a species for very long in our deep past. There were always other humans or close relatives around. This changes the whole narrative. It makes the story richer, but also much less straightforward. So is our timeline completely wrong? No, not completely wrong. The broad strokes are still there. The general order of major events. We still agree that bipedalism came before large brains. We still agree that stone tools were a major step. We still agree that our species, Homo sapiens, originated in Africa. Those fundamental pillars hold up, but the details, they are constantly being rewritten. The relationships between species, the exact dates, the precise paths of migration, the extent of interbreeding, all of these are subject to revision, and that's not a sign of failure in science. It's a sign of success. It means we are learning, we are refining our understanding. We are getting closer to the truth, even if that truth is far more complex than we initially imagined. Think about it this way. If you're trying to draw a map of a huge, unexplored territory, your first map is going to be very basic. Just the major rivers and mountains. It might be rough. It might have errors. But it's not wrong in the sense that the rivers and mountains aren't there. It's just incomplete. As you explore more, as you get better tools, you add more detail. You draw in the smaller streams, the hills, the forests, the villages, and your map becomes more accurate. They're more nuanced. Our human evolution timeline is like that map. We started with a very basic sketch. Now, we're filling in the incredible, intricate details, and those details are forcing us to redraw parts of the map. To add whole new regions we didn't know existed. The constant discovery means that the story of human evolution is never finished. It's always a work in progress, and that's what makes it so exciting. Every new fossil, every new DNA sample, every new dating method has the potential to shake things up, to give us a fresh perspective, to make us rethink everything we thought we knew. It also means we have to be okay with uncertainty. We have to be okay with not having all the answers. Science thrives on questions. It thrives on the unknown. The fact that our timeline keeps evolving is not a weakness. It's a strength. It shows the dynamic nature of scientific inquiry. It shows that we are continuously challenging our assumptions, continuously seeking a deeper, more accurate understanding of our past. So don't throw out everything you've ever learned about human evolution. The general framework remains. But do be ready for changes. Be ready for surprises. Be ready for new characters to join the story, or for old characters to take on new roles. The journey from ape-like ancestors to us was not a simple stroll down a straight path. It was a long, winding, adventurous trek through a dense, complicated forest, with many different paths, many different travelers, and we're still piecing together all the tracks. And that makes our story, our very human story, even more amazing. It's a wilder, richer, more complex tale than we ever could have imagined. And that's truly something special.